Hello, my name is Diego Roca, and with my group composed by Pablo Pérez, Roldan, Paula Pérez, Juan Acosta, and Cristina Adanero, we are going to explain the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which is Zero Hunger. To introduce this topic, it's important to know that extreme hunger and malnutrition remain a huge barrier to development in many countries. That is the reason why the SDGs aim to end all forms of hunger and malnutrition by 2030, making sure all people, especially children, have sufficient and nutritious food all year. This involves promoting sustainable agricultural, supporting small-scale farmers, and equal access to land, technology, and market. It also requires international cooperation to ensure investment in infrastructure and technology to improve agricultural productivity. As you can see, this is our index, and throughout the presentation, each group member will explain one of these 6 points, and I will start with the first one. The first point is titled, "The number of people suffering from hunger is on the rise." The number of people going hungry has increased since 2014, a horizon trend. An estimated of 821 million people were undernourished in 2017. That means about 1 person in every 9. As we can see in the image, the number of people suffering from hunger in 2015 was 784 million, so the number has increased by 37 million in 2 years. In this slide, we have a graph that shows the number and proportion of undernourished people in the world from 2005 to 2017. The number of people suffering from hunger in 2005 was 945 million. Since this year, the amount began a period of reduction until 2014, reaching its lowest point in this period, which was 784 million. However, since this year, the number has risen, and as we mentioned before, it has increased by 37 million in 2 years. Regarding the proportion, it can be pointed out that the prevalence of undernourished has remained virtually unchanged in the past 3 years at a level slightly below 11%. The situation deteriorated significantly in sub-Saharan Africa, where the number of undernourished people increased from 195 million in 2014 to 237 million in 2017. Sub-Saharan Africa remains the region with the highest prevalence of hunger, with the rate increasing from 20.7% in 2014 to 23.2% in 2017. In South America, the situation also appears to be worsening. This may be the result of an economic slowdown, which reduced fiscal capacity to project the most vulnerable against rising domestic prices and loss of income. Adverse weather conditions affecting food availability and prices, and prolonged armed conflicts are among the key drivers of these trends.
I am going to talk about the evolution of stunting and wasting in children. First of all, we have to differentiate those 3 words. They look very similar, however they are not. So first of all, undernutrition is defined as the outcome of insufficient food intake and repeated infectious diseases. It includes being underweight for one's age, too short for one's age, dangerously thin for one's height, and deficient in vitamins and minerals. Stunting is the impaired growth and development that children experience from poor nutrition, repeated infection, and inadequate psychological stimulation. Children are defined as stunted if their height for age is more than 2 standard deviations below the WHO Child Growth Standards median. Finally, wasting indicates in most cases a recent and severe process of weight loss, which is often associated with starvation and/or severe diseases. This graph shows the percentage rate of underweight, stunting, wasting, and overweight children in Bhutan, which is a country in Asia, of children between 6 months old and 59 months old. we can see the prevalence of stunting among children. It rises up from about 12% among children between 6 and 11 months old, and it reaches its maximum, which is about 40% among children between 48 and 59 months old. Underweight increases steadily with age. It increases from about 5%, and it reaches its maximum among children between 48 and 59 years old, and its maximum is about 15%. However, we can see that wasting does not follow the same pattern, and it decreases with age. It decreases from 5%, from about 5% to about 1%. Finally, we can see that there is a low level of overweight, which stays almost constant. It goes from like a 1% among children between 6 and 11 months old to about 2 or 1% among children between 48 or between 48 and 59 months old. This graph shows the percentage rate of children under 5 in India and other countries such as Pakistan, Nepal, the global percentage rate, Sri Lanka, or Brazil. This graph was taken from the Global Nutrition Report from 2015. We can see that Pakistan has the highest percentage rate of under 5 stunting children, which is 45%, and then Brazil has the lowest one, which is 7%. Furthermore, we can see that the global percentage rate is 24, and it is actually very high. We should consider that stunting has long-term effects on individual and different societies, including diminished cognitive and physical development, poor health, and an increased risk of degenerative diseases like, for example, diabetes. And this information was taken from the World Health Organization, WHO. So, undernutrition or stunting, it is defined as the inadequate height for age, as I have mentioned before. It puts children at an increased risk of dying from common infections, and it is also associated with poor cognitive development, as I have also mentioned before, and it can have very negative impact on a country's long-term progress. First of all, we have to consider that stunting and wasting in children are declining, but not fast enough to meet SDG targets. So, since, as we can see in the graph, since 2000, the proportion of stunted children has been declining. However, 149 million children under 5 years of age, 22% of the global under 5 population, were still chronically undernourished in 2018. And 3/4 of those children live in Southern Asia, 39%, and Sub-Saharan Africa, 36%. So that is the reason why more intensive efforts and active participation are needed to meet the target of bringing the number of stunted children down to 100 million by 2025 and 83 million by 2030. As we can see in the graph, in 2018, 49 million children under 5 years old, 7.3% of the global under 5 population suffered from undernutrition or wasting, which is referred to low weight for height, a condition generally caused by limited nutrition intake and infection. Finally, as we can see, over half of children with wasting live in Southern Asia, and the global wasting rate in 2018 remained well above the 5% global target for 2025 and the 3% target for 2030.
So now I'm going to talk about the prevalence of overweight that is increasing in all age groups. The degree to which a person is overweight is generally described as the body mass index, BMI. Overweight is defined as a BMI of 25 or more. That does include pro-obesity defined as BMI between 25 and 30, and obesity as defined by a BMI of 30 or more. Being overweight or fat is having more body fat than is optimally healthy. Being overweight is especially common where food supplies are plentiful and lifestyle are sedentary. As of 2003, excess weight reached epidemic proportion globally, with more than 1 billion adults being either overweight or obese. In 2013, this increased to more than 2 billion. Increases have been observed across all age groups. A healthy body requires a minimum amount of fat for proper functioning of the hormonal, reproductive, and immune system, a thermal insulation, as shock absorption for sensitive areas, and as energy for future use. But the accumulation of too much storage fat can impair movement, flexibility, and alter the appearance of the body. Childhood overweight and wasting from the double burden of malnutrition. Children who are overweight or obese are at higher risk of early onset obesity-related health and psychological complications. They often carry the extra weight into adolescence and adulthood, leading to lifelong health problems. The prevalence of overweight is increasing in all age groups, as I said before. Globally, in 2016, overweight affected 10.6% of children from 5 to 9 years old, 17.3% of adolescents, and 38.9% of adults. The promotion of healthy diets is central to halting and reversing the obesity epidemic. Governments have a range of policy options to choose from to improve access to healthy and affordable diets, from hard policies such as bans and regulation to soft policies that entail lower degrees of intervention in people's lives, such as the provision of information. Obesity increases the likelihood of various disease and conditions, particularly cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obstructive sleep apnea, 13 types of cancer, osteoarthritis, and depression. Obesity is most commonly caused by a combination of excessive food intake, lack of physical activity, and genetic susceptibility. So this graph shows the proportion of children under 5 years old who are overweight in 2018. So we got Northern Africa and Western Asia with 9.8%, Oceania 9.1%, Europe and North America 8.8%, Latin America and the Caribbean 7.5%, Eastern and Southern Asia 6.9%, Sub-Saharan Africa 3.9%, and Central and Southern Asia 3.4. So in 2018, childhood overweight affected 40 million children under 5 years of age. Prevalence levels were above 9% in Northern Africa, Southern Africa, Central Asia, Oceania, excluding Australia and New Zealand, and Western Asia. We can globally, 8% of deaths in 2017 were the result of obesity, so this represents an increase from 5.5 in 1919. So this share varies significantly across the world. In the map here we can see the share of the deaths attributed to obesity across countries, across middle-income countries, particularly across Eastern Europe, Central Asia, North Africa, and Latin America. More than 15% of deaths were attributed to obesity in 2017. This most likely results from having a high prevalence of obesity but poorer overall health and healthcare system relatively to high-income countries with similarly high level of obesity. In most high-income countries, this share is in the range of 8 to 10%. This is about half the share of many middle-income countries. The large outliers among rich countries are Japan and South Korea. There are only 5% of premature deaths are attributed to obesity. Across low-income countries, especially across sub-Saharan Africa, obesity accounts for less than 5% of deaths. So So there are many consequences and causes of malnutrition. So some of the consequences are the non-communicable or chronic illnesses, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and even some cancer. In middle and low-income countries can cause a pandemic of obesity. Probably the appearance of this malnutrition in developing countries not eating too much food, but they're eating the wrong kinds of food. And also food systems have brought about an increase in the consumption of packaged and processed food. Typically, children's obesity is not caused by a medical problem, but rather by excessive consumption of food, especially junk food, fast food, and snack food, which are high in fat and refined sugar, in combination with too little exercise. Parents of overweight or near overweight children should carefully consider what their children are eating and how active or inactive they are, and make changes as necessary to provide their children with more nutritious meals and more incentive for physical activity.
Well, now I will explain you what is the impact that small-scale food producers have in the solution to the world hunger. Small-scale producers are key to attaining food security and ending hunger, but at the same time, those small-scale food producers and family farmers are poor. Their capacities and resources are limited, and they face regular food insecurity. Additionally, they have a limited access to market and services. So how can it be possible? Well, as individual farmers are often dispersed, they may have little power to seize economic opportunities or influence policies that affect them. Too often they are excluded from decision making. However, at the same time, when rural producers come together in producer organizations, they can shape their own paths out of poverty and make their voice heard. Now I am going to explain you different ways in which farmers can get together and face poverty, and also to make their voice heard, as I said recently. First of all, we have bonding relations. These bonding relations are based on affinities among like-minded individuals, trust friends, or neighbors, who usually enjoy a similar status or share a common interest. They unite small-scale producers into formal or also can be informal organizations, associations, and cooperatives. Bonding relations enable small-scale producers to develop their own collective capacity to design and implement solutions. For example, we have the farmer field schools, the FFS in West Africa, in which farmers work together to control pests more effectively and thereby obtain higher yields. Secondly, we have breeding relations. As I said, although farmers sometimes get together in organizations, these organizations of small-scale producers are often fragmented and spatially dispersed, also have limited capacities and resources. Additionally, they face high risk and transactions costs that discourage investments in marketable crops. They are also frequently unable to influence policy processes and decision-making at the national level. However, by building intergroup relations with other local producer organizations, known as I said bridging relations, small-scale producers organizations can create larger-scale unions and federations. And lastly, we have linking relations. Cooperatives and organizations can also develop linking relations with powerful institutional actors to influence policy processes and, in the context of food security, help ensure that their concerns are heard. For example, we have the experience from FAO and other international organizations that show how small producer organizations and cooperatives link with other types of organizations, and how can this benefit them.
To continue this presentation, I will talk about food prices and how are they steeply increasing, therefore affecting several countries. So there are different factors that affect the increase in food prices. We can see this in a graph from 2015 to 2016 and from 2018 to 2019. These factors are such as corruption, inflation, trade wars, and internal conflict that make the prices of food and agricultural products to rise. So a study from the Bloomberg newspaper analyzes some of the factors I mentioned above and states that it's getting more expensive to eat, and economists are worried about this. This is because developing countries suffer a lot from this, and developing economies that are facing a price surge on some products that tend to be essential for a country's diet. For example, pork in China and onions in India, which I will show later in a graph. So as you can see here in this graph, the world food prices are on the upswing. We can see that from 2015 to 2016 it rose up a lot, and it then lowered from 2017 to 2018 and is now rising more in October than what it rose before in the last 2 years. This is a graph from the United Nations about food and agricultural world food price. Here I have the examples of onions in India and tomatoes in the same country. So as you can see, in India there has been a rise of onions of a 26% year-on-year rise that had pushed the inflation of the country above 4% for the first time in 15 months. And in Turkey, the food inflation has hovered near 30%. That is a lot. And in the first quarter of 2019 remained 15% above the 30% throughout the year. This was due to a currency crisis they had in August 2018, and it had to do with a lot of factors that affected the supply of natural resources and some constraints they had from other countries. So as you can see, there is a lot of things going into the food prices, and if we continue to have corruption or internal conflict or trade wars among countries just like the US and China, we are going to have steeply rising food prices, and someday people might not be able to eat and buy food as easy as it is now, and this will not only hurt developed countries, but it will affect and very much developing countries and developing economies such as Latin American countries or sub-Saharan Africa countries.
Hi everyone. So last but not least, we're gonna cover the topic you've seen on screen, how to support the agricultural sector from domestic and foreign sources. So first, I wanted to make a quick sum up of everything. So basically, we've seen the zero hunger goal. To end this hunger, we need to achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Yes. So to realize how big this issue is, let's put some numbers. So 149 million children under 5 are stunned. 49 million of that children are affected by wasting, and 40 million children under 5 are overweight. So we have both streams, as you have already listened in this presentation. So in a worldwide point of view, 821 million people on Earth in the 21st century were undernourished in 2017. To eradicate this problem, the agricultural sector is key. So let's take a look on screen. We have this graph that shows how the domestic and foreign sources support the agricultural sector. So the investment in this sector is critical for reducing hunger and poverty, but not only, also to improve food security, create employment, and build resilience to disasters and shocks. However, government spending on agriculture in relation to its contribution to the economic world fell between 2001 and 2017. So at the global level, the Agriculture Orientation Index, what is called AOI, the share of government expenditure to agriculture divided by the share of GDP from agriculture, fell from 0.42 in 2001 to 0.26 in 2017. From 2015 to 2017, the average was highest in Northern Africa and Western Asia with a 0.42 and lowest in Sub-Saharan Africa is always in 0.2. So aid to agriculture is only a fraction of what it was in the 1980s. This share of aid to agriculture from member countries of the Development Assistance Committee of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development fell from nearly 25% in the mid-1980s to only 7% in 2017, a total of $12.6 billion. So now that we've seen the real size of this problem, how can we fix it? So the United Nations made an estimation. You can see it on the screen. So basically, if we spend additionally from what we already spent, $267 billion per year on average, we could in 2030 achieve this zero hunger. So basically this money would be spent on rural and urban areas and social protection so that poor people can have access to food and improve their standards of living and achieve more or less decent ones. So one example of the community's commitment to this zero hunger goal is what you can see on screen. So this piece of news shows that Germany contributed with 50 million euros to strengthen the resilience in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So I chose this one because it's pretty interesting, because it's not only about the zero hunger goal but also the equality one. So with this money, they gave the opportunity to conflict-affected communities, to women to be able to work on their own in the agricultural sector and make money on their own and for their own. So apart from what governments and big firms can do, I think it's pretty important what we can do as individuals to contribute to this very, very important goal. So if we think about it, just adding up every individual behavior, we can make a huge change. So here you have some ideas. You can change your things in your own life, at home, at work, in the community. When I talk about the community, I refer to basically your costumes, your culture as a society, your daily basis things. It's pretty important that you support local things, local farmers, local food, local markets. Also make sustainable food choices, especially living in a country as the one we live in. It's pretty simple for us. Also support good nutrition, and finally fighting food waste. So here I gave you on screen some ideas about how to do so. So, for example, you have the real food movement. I think everybody knows this movement. It's basically the idea to re-educate people about from the beginning, like how food, what real food is good for your health. So the difference, for example, between eating a burger, homemade burger, or eating a McDonald's burger. So both are tasty and nice, but the impact on your health is pretty big. The other two apps that I gave you are against food wasting. So these are two ways of avoiding restaurants and supermarkets to throw away all the food they cannot sell for legislation reasons. So, for example, a food guide is basically when restaurants are about to close but they have food left, they share with the people from the app what they have left, and paying is a really small fee. You can have access to all of it, no additional cost. So unfortunately these two apps are only available for big cities, but hopefully in the near future we'll have it for all cities. Also worth mentioning the impact that you as a consumer, as a voter, can make in this very important topic, as we said before. So join the conversation in social media platforms, local communities, whenever you decide who to vote. We live in a democratic society, in a democratic nation, so please make a good use of it. So this would be the end of the presentation. We hope you liked it and you learned a lot. Take care.